Welcome to another episode on the Boom Bust channel. I'm your host Terry, and today I'm stepping into the college football world. Not something I usually do. For those that are new, I am not a college football fan. Not really at all. Except I do the NFL draft, so that's when I really dig into college football. But other than that, I don't really watch it like that. However, I think partly because the new game was out, but just in general, I had my eye on it kind of from the outside, looking in because of the college football playoff, mainly going to the 12 seed and everything, or the 12 teams. And so the discourse after everything was released, just it's been interesting. I've been consuming a lot of it, and I just wanted to come out here and give my 2 cents because, look, I'm not going to sit here and say I'm the expert on college football, anything like that, but I did feel like it was just a good brain activity. I mean, it's a good critical thinking exercise. It's part of kind of the stuff that I do anyway, looking at an issue, looking at a system, and trying to figure out different ways. So anyway, after listening to the reactions to the bracket and all that, I was like, okay, like, what would I do? How would I approach this? And even when they first started the playoff and they went to a committee and everything, I always thought it was interesting. So again, even though the games and the teams themselves I'm not too concerned about, but the process of this whole thing is interesting because college, it presents a number of barriers. Some people will say it's complex and there's different factors, and they are, but they're essentially barriers because if you wanted to structure it, you could. Like we see the NFL, there's not much. I wouldn't say there's any question. Have we ever had a question about somebody getting into the playoffs and all that? No, we don't. And so you could definitely structure it if you wanted to, but because of the fight to have the freedom, especially teams making their own schedules, that's probably one of the biggest ones. But there's so many other things that just act as barriers to efficiency, and so it makes it a bit of a unique process. Now, there's a couple things that I would say off top, like these are non-negotiable. I think most people will say, well, I would say the first one, most people will say going forward, this is what has to be done. Actually, two of these things, but for me, off top, you got to reseed. So I'm gonna be honest with you because I don't watch the NBA until the playoffs anyway. I didn't know until last season that in the NBA playoffs that it didn't reseed or whatever, like it was already predetermined. Didn't know that. I have no clue why that even exists. That makes no sense to me. I'm very used to the NFL style of the seeding, and I assumed that's what the college football playoffs would be. But as most of us found out now, there's a lock in terms of who somebody's going to play, and so it doesn't matter if Penn State, the fifth seed, or the 12th seed, Arizona State wins, they're going to play Boise State, and that yeah, it just makes no sense. So number one, I think you got to get rid of that. No matter what else you do, you got to get rid of that. You should reseed. It should always be top seed gets the lowest seed. It's not hard to do. It's no extra complexity. There's no reason not to do that. Number two, the automatic buys. I would get rid of that too. Again, I'm sure a lot of people have talked and said that. And I just realized this is not. No, this isn't correct. I pulled up a picture that's not even right. That's embarrassing. Oh well, we're gonna leave it here. But anyway, it's just a visual. It doesn't really matter. So I'm not giving 4 automatic seeds away. Not going to do that. or I'm not giving 4 automatic buys away, I should say. I do think there's room to have spots for conference champions, but I don't think that it makes any sense to get them automatic bye weeks, because the conferences are very different. I mean, it'd be one thing if this was a little bit back in the day where it was more balanced, but right now it's more unbalanced than ever. So there's no reason why I feel like a conference champ has to get a bye week. I do think winning a conference championship should be rewarded, as in you get into the playoffs, but I don't think that it should be an automatic bye week. So I would get rid of that. And then the other thing, and I honestly, I don't know 100% how they do this, but I feel like there should be a weekly thing. And I don't know if I'm remembering this correctly because it's been a while, but when they first initiated the 4-team playoff, I felt like after a certain week that was the mandate. And so I would keep that mandate after 4 weeks, about 1/3 of the season or a quarter of the season. Then start put out your initial rankings, and then continue every week to update it. Not or to update it, but to not announce it, reveal it. So I mean, I don't see why you wouldn't, as ESPN or any other. You could even rotate. It could be on ESPN one week, Fox the one week, like whatever. But I don't see why you wouldn't want to reveal show every week. And so that just adds transparency, because at least from what I hear, one of the issues is that they kind of rank teams a certain way throughout the season, but then at the end of the season, they seem to value some things over others. And I think if you do it on a weekly basis, starting from early in the season, you should have an idea of kind of where the committee is leaning. And even though you get into conference championship week, and as we saw this week, something can happen in those games to sway their opinion and all those things. So obviously it won't be perfect, but I do think that'd be more transparent. And so again, I don't know if they do that now. I don't know when they start that, but I would say 4 weeks in, that's when you that's when you give your initial rankings, and every week you should continue to update. And I don't mean like a poll. I'm not talking about an AP 25. I'm talking about these are our playoff rankings. That's what the committee's charge is supposed to be, specifically for the playoffs. And so I think that's important. So those are non-negotiable. Outside of that, then I think honestly some ways that make sense that, obviously a lot of this probably won't happen, but it's a couple different ways you could go about it. I think definitely realignment of the conferences as they stand, or creating new conferences. So even if you wanted to stay with the Power 5, now I don't know how they determine a Power 5 and all that stuff, but whatever. So if you want to stay with the Power 5, this is something that I'm very passionate about, because it irks me, even in the NFL. I really, for whatever reason, it's not a huge thing, but it just irks me that we do like these cardinal direction, groupings of teams, and they don't make sense. Like, I always keep like a realigned version of the NFL in my head. Like, why are the Colts in the AFC South? The AFC South, Indianapolis is there. Chicago's in the NFC North. It's not far from Indianapolis. Stuff like that. And so when I do college football back in the day, and now that it came back, I always realign the conferences. Always. And I do it by region. And you got multiple conferences sometimes in a region. And one conference might be lower tier, so you can put lower tier schools there. But for the most part, it should be by region. I mean, it doesn't have to be, I should say. But everything we talk about is the region, Southeast Conference, the Pacific, Atlantic, the Atlantic, whatever. Like all that is by region, and so make it actually by region. Like, how is the Big Ten have Oregon and USC and you got Rutgers? Like, it don't make sense to me. So realign. I always do that on the game and actually balance out the conferences, because what we got now is my worst nightmare. It's insane to me that like the Big Ten has like 15, 17 teams and stuff like that. But whatever. So you realign it that way, or you realign it in a totally different way. Me personally, what I think I would do, I would go by the cardinal directions. I'd do a North Conference, a South, a East, and a West. That's 4 conferences, and then each conference I would do 2 divisions. So you could break it up kind of how you want, probably West and East as well. So North, you got the Northwest, you got the Northeast. Northeast, I probably would start with Ohio, and East because they're in the Eastern Conference or time zone. More Midwest like Illinois, Wisconsin, all that, be in the Northwest. It's called Midwest anyway. So in the West, boom. Then I do like the West. You got like the coastal, and then you got the West inland, and then the South. You got Southeast, Southwest. Like that's what I would do. So you got 8 groups in total. The 2 divisions winners meet in the conference championship. Conference winner gets a seed in the or gets a spot in the college football playoffs. But again, it would be based on how you're ranked overall. You're going to be seeded how you ranked over. You'll get an automatic spot, and there might be a situation where you get, well, in this situation with 4 that encompass the whole entire thing, I think you'd be okay. But it might be a situation where one of those guys get ranked lower, I guess. I don't know, actually. In the way I just played it out, maybe not possible. But still, they wouldn't be automatic buys. That's what I would say. So there's that. Because you might have a team in another conference, in another division that's, well, not in your conference, but you might have a team in another conference that's better than your conference winner. And so you might not automatically be seeded over them, and that's how it should be. But you can do that. There's a lot of talk of having 2 large conferences, similar to the NFL. Now, obviously, it's a lot more teams, but, we got the AFC, NFC in the NFL. It could be something like that, or it could be the East, West, and you just split the country down the middle, whatever. So those are all possibilities that you could do but either way you realign it to where there's more balance and there's more structure, and then that way you could start guaranteeing some seedings and stuff like that. And then one of the other things, and I'm sure there's more, this is just me, what I was spitballing today, but for me, what I would do is I would go to a point system. I would go to a point system and incorporate all those different things that I said. So I'm going to bring that up as a little visual because I know it won't be easy to think of. So bear with me here, but this is just off the top. So I'm sure there's a lot of holes we could poke in it and talk about, but this is off the top. So this incorporates what I said before. You're going to have 4 weeks to kind of get your bearings, and then after that, we're going to roll this out. Now, in this situation, you don't need a committee because the system would be the system, and then you go for there. So I just kept it simple, to be honest with you. But the main things that I looked at, okay, what are my in-season factors? Because I do think that's one of the biggest flaws. The biggest flaws is everything is hindsight. And I don't really like that, to be honest. I think that if you play, for example, you play an Indiana team that's 5-0, upstart, team, whatever, and they're hot, and you beat them. And it's like, okay, you beat a 5-0, and cool. If they end up going, 5-7 or 6-6 or whatever, I just don't feel like it's fair to look at the end of the season and be like, oh, that was a decent win. Like, no, you gotta give it to like the team they played in the moment. Not like the whole thing, but part of it needs to be like, what are they doing in the moment? And I think that part is important. So you got in-season factors, and these happen week to week. And again, it's really just an accumulation. Now, the way I set it up, again, this is ultra simple. You could do it more sophisticated to the point where you do have negative consequences, but essentially, it's a zero-sum game because if you don't win, if you lose, you get no points. And some people might say, well, you should have negative points or whatever. But the thing is there always other team getting points, and the team you lose to gets points too. So the way this works, let me just go through it, I guess. So in season factor, you got the weekly opponent record. Again, you wait 4 weeks because first week it ain't gonna matter. But after the first 4 weeks, then it's just on a 3-point scale essentially. So if your opponent is 75% or better in their record, and again, those change over the weeks, and that takes into account kind of when you play teams, then you'll get 3 points. If they're below 75 but above 60, 2 points, below 60, 1 point. And you could even add it in there to where if they're below 50, then there's no points. You could do that too. And then weekly opponent rank. If they're in the top 5, 3 points. If there's 19 through 6, 2 points. 20, 25, 1 point. Margin of victory. So how bad? So people, or defeat. So people, and if you do defeat, then, obviously you would add a negative scale to it. But so many people talk about how you win, style points, blah, blah, blah. So if you beat somebody 30 plus, 3 points. 15, 29, 2 points. Boom. Road victory, you get a point. Conference championships, and the big conversation really between SMU and Alabama was about conference championships and all that. So if you are a conference champion, 3 points. Runner-up, 1 point. If you beat a conference champion, so Georgia's the SEC conference champion, and then people say, oh, well, Bama beat them, or, Bama beat those competition. That's an extra point at the end of the year that added on, too. And then end of the year factors. So not completely relying on the week to week. Yes, the end of the year matters. So your overall opponent record. Are your opponents above 75%? Same thing kind of deal. But the points, right, I do give more weight to the end of the year. And again, the scale can be changed. It's more about the method. You could change the scale as much as you want. If I had to guess, the max on this type of scale would probably be somewhere between 75 and 100 points over the season. You could do that times 10, get it up to 1,000 points and change the scale of what's worth what. That's all, fine and dandy. This more is just the approach that I'm talking about. Your record against ranked opponents. Again, are you 75%? Blah, blah, blah. Now, since it's end of the year, that'll be like the final ranked opponents, and which is what they do now. Again, they completely discount where a team was ranked in the moment and only talked about where their final ranking was. So this comes in to play, because I do think it's important, but I don't think it should be the only thing. So that does come into play. Your point differential, which is basically the end of the year version of margin of victory. 30 plus, and I don't know the numbers. I just threw this out there. I didn't throw it out there, but I kind of copied it from Margin of Victory. But so obviously you could do the research and figure out what the bands would be that make more sense. And then record against your conference, same thing. So those give you points. Tiebreakers, we'll get to that. I added this on a little later. So multipliers, you see a lot of these are in pink. And pink indicates that it gets a multiplier. Now this is where it's probably a question. But I would say probably the biggest discussion is outside of conference championships is the difference in conference. And you could tell me, I would love to hear other people's thoughts because I might be wrong about this. But this is where I struggled the most, and this is kind of where I just landed. I feel like the only way to really judge a conference, not only way, but what I have is essentially you got the early season, which is what I would call the first 4 weeks. And based off the preseason top 25 rankings, that's how you would rank the conferences. Now, it could be AP, it could be whatever. They decide which body they feel is the most legit. Or maybe you do have a committee and you do your own ranking, whatever. But based on that, the conference with the most top 25 teams, they're the number one conference. And then so on and so forth. And so the multiplier, essentially what it does, that does take into account your opponent. And if they're in the top conference, it's worth 1.5 points or win. Now, I'll be honest, I initially had this as like 3 points, 2 points, 1 point, but I changed the impact because of potential trying to cheat the system, and we'll get into that later. So, for example, if you beat, let me see, if your team beats, I don't know why I'm blanking on the team. Let's just say your team beats Boise State. All right. So you beat Boise State. This doesn't come into impact. That doesn't come into impact. So you beat Boise State on the road. You beat them by 30. So you got 4 points. And really, like, a win should be part of that too. But you got 4 points. Boise State conference isn't in the top 3, so you just got 4 points. But let's say you beat Tennessee on the road by 30. Okay, you got 4 points, but Tennessee's in the number one conference, the SEC, based off the preseason rankings. So you get 1.5 extra. So you get 5.5 points instead of 4. Or you beat Minnesota. They're in the Big Ten. And that's the second conference. So it's 1 point. So you get 5 points instead of 4. That's how that would work. Once we get past the 4 weeks and we get our initial top 25 rankings, which is what I would push for after 4 weeks, then we'll move to that. So we'll go, that'll shift every week. Your conference and how many teams they got in the top 25 rankings. That's what we do. End of the season, what I did was conference record against non-conference opponents. So that means what was your conference's record against non-conference opponents? And this is where I realized I'm sure some people will see a flaw in the system. Now, I looked at the numbers for this year, and then I looked at 2019, back when it was, more of a normal balanced conference type going on. And both of them pretty much bore out. Like, the number one was the SEC. Well, I wouldn't say number one. I only looked at SEC and Big Ten, but the SEC was better than the Big Ten in both years. And looking throughout the different teams' records, it does give you a kind of a good sense of how well the conference is doing against other teams. And that, to me, is the only real way you can talk about it, because a lot of times when people are debating two teams, it's always subjective and it comes down to talent, which I understand, but there's no objective way to measure the talent necessarily, especially not a clean way. And so if you do that, that's always going to leave room, like we got with SMU and Bama in that discussion. So if you want to do it in an objective way, I felt like, because you can have the best teams. If you got all the best teams in your conference, or even like, let's say in the NFL, say the four best teams in the league are in one division. They're going to cannibalize each other because there's only a finite amount of wins. So they're going to beat each other up. Now, the NFL is set up a little different where, 6 of your 17 games now are in the division. But again, the NCAA doesn't necessarily have those types of restrictions. So I just look at the percentage. So, because I'm sure some people say, well, this conference plays more conference games versus this one. So I just look at the percentage. So one conference might be 81% win percentage outside of conference. The other one might be 74. And that's how I would rank them. And so at the end of the year, when we get to that point, that's what that would be multiplied by. So without getting into too crazy of math, it would essentially be an average. And so it wouldn't just be, hey, all opponents are equal in overall opponent record. No, you would go through each opponent, and depending on what conference they're in, they'll get a little extra win. That's essentially what that would come down to. So if my opponent, I don't know, let's just say I played a SEC opponent. So who's is Georgia and Texas? Okay, so let's say we look at Georgia, you beat Texas, and I don't know the actual record, but let's say Texas won 10 games. Because Texas is in the number one conference, I'll add 1.5 wins to their record, so it's 11.5. And so I'll continue to do that for each individual team, giving more credit to teams that are in harder divisions. And the same kind of similar math would be done, although probably a little differently with these other groups. So those are the multipliers that I would use throughout the year. Now, at the end of the year, you could just do end of the year top 25 rankings. You could. But the 25 rankings, to me, honestly, it's an okay metric, but I don't think it's the best. But again, the flaw that I thought, and again, I'm sure there's a lot that I'm missing, but what I was thinking of was like, okay, well, what if the SEC says, well, we're just going to schedule a bunch of cupcakes? And, obviously the whole conference has to kind of decide that. But if you did that, your weekly advantage would not be there. You could make up points in margin of victory, but you wouldn't get any extra points for tough conference players. You might, because I think in my mind, like I'm gonna pick the North Dakota States. I'm gonna pick the ones that I know we can beat, but they're most likely gonna beat their entire conference. And so you could, get a team with a good record, but again, you won't get the conference boost. Road victory, you'll get a point, but you won't get the conference boost. But you might say, hey, it'll make up for it in the end when we do our conference record against non-conference opponents. We're going to get that. Again, initially it was 3 points, which probably would have swayed this pretty hard. But that's why I reduced it. So, okay, we'll get the 1.5 point win boost because our non-conference record is good. So again, there's a lot of ways you could change the scale of the numbers. And, these, first of all, they're on college campuses. They got statisticians, they got people, but they got staffs and money. They're going to hire data. If you did something like this, they'll be crunching all summer to figure out what's the most advantageous thing to go after. That's gonna happen. People always gonna try to game the system, and so you could do the same thing as the committee or whoever, where y'all work it out to where these numbers feel the most balanced to you, and let the chips fall where they may. But this is the system that I would do. This is just what I would do. So this gives me a way to multiply, take into account teams that are in stronger conferences. This gives me a way to look at weekly things. This gives me a way to factor in the conference championship, beating the conference championship. And this gives me a way, conference champion, my bad. And this gives me a way to factor in, at the end of the year. I think in the moment should be looked at, but at the end of the year, the overall should be looked at too. Now, these things aren't in pink. They don't get a multiplier. And the reason is because the ranking is the ranking. That's already kind of its own thing. So I don't feel like you need to add a multiplier to that. Like if you're ranked in the top 25, you're ranked in the top 25. So that's that. And then because it's a point system, now it's an objective measure. It's just a point. Again, you don't need a committee. You just need a couple people for checks and balances to make sure the numbers are being ran. And it's updated every week for transparency. So you know what your team is doing in terms of heading towards the playoffs. Now, the last thing you have is tiebreakers, much like the NFL. Number one, be head to head if you played each other. If not, common opponents. What's your record as common opponents? And then points scored. There might be another tiebreaker before points scored, but that's essentially what we would do. And that'd be it. Then you get your rankings by the 12 people with the most points, and then you let them play. So that is my pitch for fixing the college football playoffs. So go down in the comment section. Let me know what you think. Share around, get the conversation started. Thumbs up, subscribe, and thank you for listening.